Good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this 17th day of April 2023. And what a beautiful day it is out here in Brisbane at this point in time. 24 degrees and mostly cloudy. Hey, it's wonderful to have your company today to this great start for this week. And what a big weekend it has been. We know that it's the Ramadan month for our Muslim brothers and sisters, and there's been many iftar dinners which we had the pleasure of attending, and it is good to see that the multicultural community all coming together, and we'd like to place on record our special thanks and appreciations for our Muslim brothers and sisters for welcoming, and there were two iftar dinners which we had together with the police commissioner. And yesterday, a beautiful function happened at the Ahmadiyya Muslim one, where fasting in our religion was a discussion topic just before the iftar dinner, and religious leaders from all different faiths took part in that and discussed what fasting means to them and how it is practiced in their respective religions. So that was another very good function. And of course, there was many other figures. The big event was the Arijit show, and as we talked about it on Saturday, that was a huge success. I think probably the biggest Indian musical concert in Brisbane so far that I have witnessed. The number of people, I think it was a good choice of going to Bundall. I keep saying Bundall Entertainment Centre because that's what it was before. Now it is known as Brisbane Entertainment Centre. Yes, and Brisbane Entertainment Centre, that amazing concert that happened there. Brisbane Indian Times and Australian Indian Radio are proud to be supporting that mega event. And what a great performance. 4 hours plus non-stop performance by one artist. It's just amazing, the energy that he brought to the stage. The beauty is the sound and lighting and the musicians, everything was just top class. So that's what made it a huge success, I must say. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now let's get on with the news. While we're getting on with the news, we still don't have the Daily India report coming in as yet. But we will let you know once that happens. But right for now, let's begin with news in brief.
A report out this morning has revealed the devastating impact of online scams on Australians, with more than $3 billion lost to criminals last year alone. The ACCC says the record losses represent an 80% increase from the year before. Average losses have also jumped by 54% to almost $20,000 per victim.
What we're seeing is scammers moving onto an industrial scale, using new technologies and new capacity to attack Australian households and businesses, and a lot more needs to be done to be combating this.
In Sydney, 2 men have been charged over an alleged kidnapping in January. Police say a man and woman in their 20s were forced into a vehicle in Fairfield on the 18th of January. They escaped 2 days later. The man's finger was severed during the incidents.
In Sudan, gunfire is continuing despite an agreement to pause fighting between the Sudanese army and paramilitary forces. 59 civilians, including 3 United Nations employees and scores of fighters, have been killed in clashes which began on Saturday.
Planning for next year's Gather Round has kicked off, with the South Australian Government and the AFL agreeing to keep the football festival in SA until at least 2026. More than 220,000 fans attended the round. It saw every team descend on South Australia for matches at both the Adelaide Oval and smaller local grounds.
So there you go, amazing news there, and South Australia, well done on securing that sport. Well, next up, we're going to look at the Voice to Parliament. And this campaign, I know I have an interview later in the day with someone talking about this, but what's your point of view on this as well? My point was, from the very beginning, that there should be one, but it should not be this process, but there are due processes when there is a constitutional change. So it has to go through that, and it's a huge cost to bring about what should have been just given.
The No campaign against an Indigenous voice to Parliament is launching its advertising campaign today. It comes as the Prime Minister is in Tasmania this morning for the launch of a marathon campaign for the voice. For more, our political reporter Dana Morse joins us now from Parliament House. Dana, good morning. Yes, campaigning on both sides of this referendum, certainly stepping up a gear today.
Good morning, Michael. Yes, is certainly the case. We'll start with the Yes campaign, where the former Liberal MP Pat Farmer is starting off his marathon campaign called Run for the Voice. It's launching in Tasmania today. The Prime Minister will be there, as will the Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney, and the Tasmanian Premier, who's a Liberal Premier, Jeremy Rockliff, will be there to see Mr Farmer off. Now, he's planning to run up to 80 kilometres every day for the next 178 days to raise awareness for the Yes campaign for the voice. He'll finish at Uluru in October, and of course we know the referendum is planned to be held between October and December this year, so he'll be bringing a lot of awareness to the campaign around the time that we'll be heading into the voting period. Now, we also have the launch of some advertising material from the No campaign today, and this is from one of the No campaigns called Recognise a Better Way, and that's helmed by Warren Mundine. Now, the advertising features what Mr Mundine has called everyday Indigenous Australians who do not support the voice to Parliament and don't believe that it represents them, and it will be rolling out across print and TV, and they're targeting states where they feel they have potentially the opportunity to get a no case over the line at a referendum. So, as you said, Michael, it is a bit of a step up in the campaigning today.
And it comes after prominent No campaign voices Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, and Liberal Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price have doubled down, Dana, on comments about child protection in Alice Springs.
Yeah, so Senator Price appeared on Insiders yesterday, where she spoke about, again, the issues that she raised a couple of days ago when she was in Alice Springs with Peter Dutton, saying that there is rampant child sexual abuse and that children are being returned to their abusers. Now, when Senator Price was pushed on this because of the mandatory reporting laws in the NT, she didn't say that she had mandatory reported it. She said she assumed it had happened and that Territory families had been made aware of the situation. Now, there's been a lot of talk about data relating to these sexual abuse claims. The most up-to-date data we have comes from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare from the 2021-2022 period, and there was around 102 substantiated instances of child sexual exploitation in the Northern Territory in that time. Now, that was a spike up from 23 cases in the years prior, but Territory families attribute that to a change in the reporting requirements. And of course, the Northern Territory has some of the strictest mandatory reporting laws in the country. So Territory families saying they're capturing more cases because more people are required to report. Now, around 31.9% of those claims are actually relating to neglect. So those claims span a range of different areas of child abuse, and a large swathe of them are captured by neglect, and experts say that's due to the high levels of poverty in the Territory. And we of course know the difficulties in remote parts of the community where things like housing and food prices are through the roof, and it can result in obviously cases of neglect there. So it is a very complex situation, and the comments from Senator Price have been rejected again by the Police Minister Kate Worden, who says she hasn't heard from either Peter Dutton or Senator Price, and the experts in this space are warning against reading just the numbers as flat figures. They say there's a lot of important context there that needs to be explained. Michael?
Well, of course there is, and having a mandatory reporting system in place is good, but if people don't follow that, if they don't report, you still haven't got the right data. So that is the point. So when they made those cases, they were asked to back it up with the data, as there is mandatory reporting requirements in the Northern Territory. But many times, reports are not forthcoming, and hence the data that is available at hand is not quite accurate. Next up, we look at unemployment, which remains already steady despite all the economic downturn that we've all been listening to or hearing about. Now, it is very, very, that vicious cycle of, where do we, to balance the cost of living prices, the wages are increased, and to absorb the increase in the wages, the suppliers then increase the price of the goods that they are selling. So who is the winner in the end? Where does it stop? Here's that report.
There are 508,500 people in Australia without a job at the moment, about 25,000 more than last October when the unemployment rate bottomed at 3.4%, and the rate hikes started kicking in. But according to the people who run the economy, the unemployment rate needs to be about 4.5% to prevent inflation. That's another 140,000 people, enough to fill the MCG and the SCG. The RBA stopped raising interest rates last month because it thinks it might have done enough already to make that happen. But why? The idea is that low unemployment pushes up wages and therefore inflation. But even with the lowest unemployment in 50 years, wages are less than inflation, so they're not causing it. The Reserve Bank just thinks it will. Here's a graph of the unemployment rate in Australia since 1900. Full employment used to be defined as 2% unemployment. Now it's 4.5%. Here's what the difference between those two definitions means in human terms, if applied to today's labour force. So why do 370,760 more people, almost 4 MCGs full, have to be out of work to make the economy work properly? Well, it's a mystery, and it's probably why full employment are the first 2 words in the terms of reference for the employment white paper that Treasury is currently working on. Defining that term is a key purpose of the white paper. It'll be finished in September. We can't wait.
So there you are, and I think that's a wonderful reporting there as well. Well, right now, next up, we will look at the anti-smoking ads, and let's take a look back and see how effective it has been. And maybe that's a model that we can use for some other campaigns.
We had no health warnings and allowed tobacco advertising to run rampant, so we're really kind of quite far behind the game compared to comparable countries like the UK or US or Denmark.
Yeah, but then as awareness grew about the health risks of smoking, we started to see some of these ads encouraging people to quit. The ones in the early 1970s are fascinating. They took a bit more of a light-hearted approach. Let's just have a look at some of the examples.
What made you fancy me in the first place?
Hello. I owe everything I have to cigarettes. My cough, stained fingers, yellow teeth, and incurable lung cancer.
Oh, I needed that.
So, Thomas, that's taking a sort of a dark humour approach to the anti-smoking campaigns. Did it work?
Yeah, well, the aim of those ads was to convince government that tobacco advertising on television and radio was harming youth, so creating a whole new generation of smokers. And so they were deliberately satirical to bring to light the danger of the existing tobacco ads on television, and they did work. They convinced the coalition government at the time to put in some regulations, and then the Whitlam government in 1973 to legislate the complete ban of tobacco advertising on television and radio.
There you go, it was effective after all. Let's take another look at a different ad. This one is from the 80s when we first saw the Quit campaign sponsor sport, and that was in direct competition with tobacco sponsorship. Let's have a look.
Winners are winners, quitters are ahead. Let the best in you come sailing through, let your body do its best.
I don't smoke, the second best just isn't good enough.
So that would have set up quite a contrast with the tobacco-sponsored ads then.
Yeah, it did. I mean, if you can imagine back at the time, places like the MCG or football clubs, whatever, were branded with tobacco advertising, sponsored by various tobacco companies. I mean, race car driving is probably the most famous. And so Quit was a direct contrast, and I think these ads were really effective at bringing brand to the Australian attention. And any kind of celebrity endorsement, I think it really helps elevate a brand. So it was the Quip brand at that time was relatively new, and so it was quite effective at bringing people to people's attention, which is great.
And then we came to the early 2000s and there was more and more awareness of just how harmful smoking was, and we saw the ads take a really, really dark, negative and graphic turn. Let's have a look at some of those.
The human lung is like a sponge designed to soak up air. But some people use it to soak up smoke. If the average smoker could collect and wring out what goes into his lungs over a year, he'd find this much cancer-producing tar.
Lungs are made up of millions of tiny air sacs. Chemicals in tobacco smoke destroy them. It's called emphysema, and it's irreversible.
Those ones just are so fresh in my memory because they just had such an impact because of how graphic and scary they were. What was the response to those at the time?
Well, the sponge ad's actually really quite old, so it predates me. It came out a year before I was born. It was made in 1979. And it was done by the same creative, John Bevins, who did the 1971 campaign as well. And the whole idea of them was to create an image that shocked audiences and motivated them to seek help quitting. And it was really effective at doing that. It was demonstrated in various evaluations in New South Wales and Victoria to show that it really drove people to seek cessation help. And so the later ad, the bubble wrap ad, which came out in 2005, and other ads in that vein have maintained that kind of shocking metaphoric imagery, which is, it's really effective. And as we've gone on through that history, we've seen more science-informed advertising to kind of drive people to cessation and seek support from Quitline and from GPs. And it's been, every time we show those ads, they've had that effect, which is great.
And of course it wasn't just ads on TV and radio, but we also had the packaging ads printed on cigarette packages. So I guess smokers really couldn't avoid those ones.
No, well, plain packaging is really kind of the end result of the original, original campaign. It both bans tobacco advertising, removes all kind of tobacco branding, and promotes a cessation message. So it's been extremely effective, and which is why it's being replicated around the world. So it was Australia first, and it's been fantastic.
I guess now when we look at how far Australia has come on smoking, Australia today, as we mentioned, has one of the lowest smoking rates in the world, but there are other addictions that are rising in popularity. I'm thinking in particular of people taking up vaping. Do you think we could see the approaches that were taken on smoking applied elsewhere, like vaping?
Yeah, look, vaping is a huge and emerging problem, and the prevalence among youth is really astounding. I'm a historian, so my work is always about looking backwards, and vaping is very much an emerging problem, so it's not really my field. However, I think there are lessons from this history that we can draw and that will be applied to things like vaping in some way. I think probably the most analogous public health problem right now is probably actually gambling. It has the same level of public dislike of gambling advertising, and will likely create the kind of same motivation that we saw in the early 70s to ban tobacco advertising. So I think if I had to guess, that would be the next big thing. But vaping, I'm sure you'll have people on talk about that, but I think it has some of the problems too.
And there you go, from one problem to another. That vaping thing is, quite equivalent to smoking. That's my take on it, and should not have been introduced in the first place. Now, it's been marketed, it's been commercialized, and now the campaign begins. So all this, could have been avoided if it had not been put out there in the first place. But anyway, people are out there to make a buck, and they do that. Next up, or probably the last report for today, last topic for today, would be pets. Now, when we look at pets, are pets meant to live in the houses? Are we actually looking after them? Is it doing justice to them? Were they meant to be that way? or pets were just supposed to be left in their own natural environment, in their own natural habitat, the way nature had intended them to be. But of course, when we look at dogs and things, we know that they say it's a man's best friend and a very, very good companion. No doubt they are. But would they be better off if they were just left to their own accords, to their own instinct? When they talked about the animal instinct, so they have their instinct, all the things. So we make them domesticated, we make them reliant on the system, and then there's so many things that are related. Now the other problem we have, if they are vicious dogs which actually attack children or attack people. Here's that report.
We don't collect good data. The best data we have is hospital admissions emergency. But based on that data, it appears that at least they're not going down, and dog bites probably are increasing a little bit. But we also need to remember that the numbers of dogs in Australia are increasing at the same time.
There are often discussions around certain breeds of dogs. There are restrictions on certain breeds of dogs. Is it more about the breed, or is it more about the individual dog, or is it both?
It's more about the individual dog. So we shouldn't focus on breeds. Any dog can bite, any breed can bite. Small dogs can inflict serious injuries the same as larger dogs. And there is as much difference in personality within a breed as there is between breeds. So I think our focus needs to be, taking this matter really seriously. My sympathy goes out to everyone who's affected by a dog bite at all. And we should treat every dog as potentially able to bite.
For owners taking responsibility there, what is their responsibility, and what should they be looking out for that perhaps might ring some alarm bells in their dog's behaviour?
The majority of dogs don't bite because they're psychopaths. Actually, the majority of dogs don't bite. The majority we live very closely with and we have no problems with. But when they do bite, it's usually because of anxiety and fear rather than outright aggression. So if you have a dog that you know has some fear, then you need to be aware of that. And for a start, you should always supervise dogs and children. Children act unpredictably, and dogs can startle and bite as a result of that. And children are also really bad at reading dog body language. So we can't rely on children to know the dog doesn't want to talk to me now. And then I think just taking it seriously, because a lot of people don't, and actually YouTube videos where people are provoking dogs to make them growl, I just can't watch them, because those poor dogs, and when they do bite, the dogs are blamed rather than the people that are provoking them.
An important point to make as well is that dogs behave differently with their owners and the family that they know than they do with strangers. So two questions here. How should you approach a dog that you don't know? But then also, are you right to feel confident if you do know the dog?
Yeah, two good questions. If you're approaching a dog that you don't know, for a start, you don't approach it. You would stay a distance away. If the owner is not there, then I know a lot about dogs and I wouldn't approach that dog, particularly if they're behind a fence or in a car or something like that where they might be protecting some territory. That's a big no-go zone. If the owner says, yes, it's okay to approach, then you would approach slowly. Often dogs don't like to be approached head-on, and they certainly don't like to be patted on the head, the majority. So you can approach at a slight angle towards the shoulder. If the owner says it's okay for you to pat my dog, what you could do then is just pat your leg to encourage the dog to come over. You could pet it on the shoulder gently, pause, and then see if the dog stays there or moves away. If it moves away, then respect the dog's space and you don't go back to it.
The problem there is it's okay for her to say that, it's okay to be discussing that here, but does everyone out there know that? How do we get that message out to everyone who's there? Because these incidents don't happen like that. These are like accidents. So are we calling for that? So, how to approach a dog, how not to approach a dog. Does everyone know that? And, in a given circumstance, if someone's faced with a situation like that, will they recall that? Will they know that? That is the big question. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful having your company. Right now, let's take a look at some of the functions and events taking place right here in Brisbane after the big, huge weekend which we had. There you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. And it's been wonderful having your company on this Monday. Right now, it's 25 degrees and partly sunny. As I mentioned before, there's lots that's happening in Brisbane, and there's been lots more interviews that are happening, and we'll be bringing to you all of those as and when they come available and when they happen. So there will be lots to talk about. We'll be talking about the Basava Jayanti that is coming up as well. We spoke to Guru PT, Prasant Tripedi, and there are so many other interviews that are coming your way, and that would be probably our focus or a more drive moving forward. We're trying to bring to you more topics, and of course there will be discussion on this very important topic of the voice to Parliament. And there are community consultations which have already begun. But we will be talking to few people right here on this studio. So with that, it's time to say goodbye. And as I mentioned before, it's always great to have your company. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye from me.